computer there. I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 14th of September 2021 held in the Council Chambers of the City of Subiaco open at 5:32 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, the media and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Wadja Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and to the waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Please note this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings will be made available on the City's YouTube channel following the meeting. Confidential sections of the meetings will not be live streamed or recorded. To my knowledge, there are no confidential sections tonight. So, moving on to agenda item 2, attendance, apologies and leave of absence. We have apologies from Councillor Mansfield and Councillor McMullen. And I believe everybody else is here. We have a leave of absence from Mayor Penny Taylor. And we have Councillor Phelan. Do we have an apologies from Councillor Phelan? No. Okay, we'll just leave that open at this stage. Do we have any disclosures of interest? No disclosures of interest. Moving on to agenda item 4, approved deputations. There are none. Moving on to the Chief Executive Officer, you're going to do the conditions. Thank you.
I think we're all good, Presiding Member.
Thank you. Announcements by Presiding Member. There are none. Agenda item 6, we're moving on to officers' reports for discussion. C1 is the draft local planning policy, non-residential development on land zoned centre, local centre and mixed use. This is the consideration post-advertising. It went to Council on the 22nd of June 2021. No submissions were received by the City. Do we have any questions on this item? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I'd just preface by noting that there's been a change in the policy wording in respect of the amenity considerations, and that it's thought that that's not really a substantive change. At this stage, I think it is a substantive change on what was put out for public consultation, but whether that matters or not is really the subject of my questions. So I think the first question is, if we could just be reminded, I know we've been told this numerous times before, but when we're following a statutory process to develop the policy, which requires it to go to public consultation. So my memory is that once it's been out and comes back, can you just remind us of what our powers are in respect of changes? Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. So obviously the City's made a number of largely administrative modifications since Council last considered it and since it was publicly advertised. Many of those changes are just to clean up spelling mistakes, formatting issues, and to change the format of how it was presented so it was easier to actually read and understand. The City's officers did additional testing of the policy, which resulted in some clarifications to shore up the intent of a number of the objectives and the provisions. If Council was of the mind not to I guess proceed with the policy at this point, we could go out to public advertising again and I guess go through that process again should Council resolve to do that, and then we're back in the same position where you're reconsidering the results of the public advertising and any modifications that may come a result of that.
Yeah, my question was more around whether we have to do. I just sort of remember there's usually the power to change adopt. You know, there's usually a range of things, and I'm just wondering if one of them is to change it without going back to public consultation.
Yeah, so under the, through you, presiding member, under the planning and development regulations, the procedure for amending a local planning policy, subclause 2 of clause 5 says the local government may make an amendment to a local planning policy without advertising the amendment. In the opinion of the local government, the amendment is a minor amendment.
Okay, so that leads me on to the more difficult part of the question, which is, as I read the wording change, I think if you were a resident and you read the two things, you would see them as quite different, because one talks about protecting the amenity of residential uses, and the other's talking about balancing between non-residential development and preservation, and that sends a very different message, which is that as a resident you can expect your amenity to be diminished, which may be a requirement of the planning framework. So I'm just like to understand where this is coming from, because obviously our policy can't cut across the planning framework. So are we able to weave that back in so that all we're doing is really honouring what we have to do anyway? I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. So I'm assuming you're referring to the changes to the amenity considerations. So where we're including or recommending to include the new text prior to the development requirements. It's not necessarily, I guess, a provision that we're adding in. It's more to clarify what the role or the intent of the policy is, which broadly aligns with, I guess, the objectives of the policy as well.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions on C1? Okay, I have some questions. Thank you. When reading this draft policy, I couldn't help but think that the Bunnings DA was a very good example. Would I be right in assuming that? Yes, he nods. Thank you. And therefore, I was thinking, just for example, on page 12 of the attachment, location and design of car parking, and we talk about any car parking from view from the primary street. And I couldn't help but think about the prominence, for example, of the Bunnings car park and its impact on the corner of the primary and Ty Street. It's really in view from the primary because of the prominent corner. And I wondered if there were thoughts there, and I'm happy to talk further during the week with you about an amendment there of whether we say any prominent corner, whether that would be relevant. So I'll just park that with you. And another issue that I thought about with bin storage and waste management on page 13, and it's not necessarily just really about Bunnings at all with this case, but obviously with FOGO coming, all the time changes in waste and its management, are we ensuring that our future developments are catering for this and creating enough space if we go into a 3 or 4 or 5 bin system? I've just come from a conference where they were literally talking about a 7 bin system, for example. So, thank you if you'd like to answer that.
Thank you, and through your presiding member, I guess with any larger scale development application, we'd refer it internally to a number of different departments, including our waste team. They provide advice as such as the number of bins that are required, or if the requirements are changing imminently. They'll advise of that as well. So I think, they're currently at 3. I'm not sure if they'll get to 7 bins, but the advice will be provided at the time of when the DA is submitted.
Is all we can go by. Okay. I also can't help but reflect on the development of the Vibe and Subiaco, where they catered for their bin storage and so on underneath, and whether we could encourage that sort of, particularly on developments where they're requesting extra height and so on. Is there anything we can do there where we can encourage bin storage and collection by them catering for the vehicles going underneath the building and so on?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. So this policy wouldn't actually apply to, say, if the Vibe Hotel was going to apply for planning approval now. This applies to, I guess it's more intended to apply to smaller scale development where there's currently like an Onslow Road shopping centre type thing where the planning framework or the planning scheme sets out heights, setbacks and plot ratios. It doesn't go into nuanced details for like things like the pedestrian experience, where the loading and unloading areas are and bin storage. Those requirements in, I guess, the town centre area already covered through other planning frameworks. And also that our design review panel looks at those considerations when they consider those applications.
Has that promoted any more discussion? Thank you, Councillor Davies.
So would I be right in saying that the location and design of car parking is actually seeking to encourage exactly what has happened at the new Bunnings on Hay Street, where it's wholly contained within the building, and try and eliminate what's happening over at the current Bunnings on Salvado Road, where there's a sea of parking adjoining the street?
Thank you, and through your presiding member, effectively, yes. It's from an urban design perspective, it's a very poor outcome to have car parking between, I guess, the footpath and the building itself. So this policy seeks to provide some guidance and direction on getting improved urban design outcomes for an improved pedestrian experience.
Big contrast between the two Bunnings, but in this case there was some contention of the streetscape experience as you walk past this new proposed DA, because they were looking into a car park and so on, and I believe it depended on future vegetation and so on and so forth. That became very relevant from memories of the debate last Friday. Okay, thank you. Moving on to C2. This is the draft amended local planning policy 7.6, amendment and extension to the term of development approval consideration post advertising once again, which dated again on the 22nd of June, and no submissions were received from the advertising period. Do we have any questions on this item? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley.
Not a question, just a little comment. I just picked up a typo that I thought I would mention. I think it's a typo. It's on 6.1.4, and I think the word approval's probably meant to be approved, but I'll just leave that with the staff.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions on C2? No? Okay, then let's move on to the C3, Subiaco Oval Shared User Agreement. Here we just have a update from an inadvertent omittance of a key provision pointed out by Councillor Jennings. Thank you, Councillor Jennings, and thank you, staff, to the pickup. Do we have any comments on this or questions? No, thank you. Moving on then from C3 to C4 is an item to be discussed at the next meeting. So C5, the 2020 annual electors meeting, as you know, was delayed and was held on the 12th of August 2021. We have 3 points here from the officer recommendation. Do we have any questions on this item? Okay, thank you, councillors. We move on to C6, the financial statements and reports for the month ending the 31st of July 2021. Do we have any questions from this for this item? We could be breaking a record here for the fastest meeting. Will we do it? So thank you, councillors. We will move on to agenda item 7. No, that's meeting closed to the public. We don't need to do that. So moving on to agenda item 8, closure of meeting. I declare the City of Subiaco Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 14th of September 2021 closed at 5:48 p.m. Thank you to councillors, staff, the media for their attendance, the member of the gallery. Good evening.